Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, the NFL Week 9 recap show. I'm John McKechnie, filling in for Jeff Erickson on this fine Monday. That, of course, the man himself, Nick Whalen. Nick, how did this NFL Week 9 treat you? What were kind of some of the big overarching things that you've been stewing on?
It treated me relatively well. Fantasy-wise, we're off to a good start. Have a lot riding on Cade Otton tonight in many high-stakes leagues. So hopefully that comes through. We will see. Went 3-2 in the Circa contest. Just not going to get it done. 3-2 sounds okay, but in that contest, you got to go at least 4-1. So I believe this is the final week of Q2. We flipped the page now to Q3. Got to go on a run here. Had a good week over at Bookies Plus. Went 5-1 on my NFL totals and sides. So make sure you go check that out. Bookies Plus, it's free. Just throw in your email. You get free picks delivered to you every single day. It was a good week, John, for favorites. 13-1 straight up our favorites heading into that Kansas City Tampa Bay game tonight. 10-4 against the number. Of course, pending that KC Tampa Bay game. New Orleans, our only favorite to lose straight up. Believe me, we will get to that game. We have news out in New Orleans as well. New Orleans, Philly, Buffalo, and Tennessee, your only favorites not to cover so far. So it kind of feels like week to week, it swings dramatically between complete chaos and complete chalk. And this was more of a chalky week so far.
I know, and early on in the season, like every dog had his day, it seemed like, and things are reversing as far as that trend is concerned. And why don't we kick things off? This won't shock anybody with me in the hosting chair to start off in Baltimore, but you know what? It's my dang show. We're doing it.
There is.
Ravens drop a 40 burger on the Denver Broncos. The Broncos had been 4-0 on the road going into this game. Ravens had struggled over the last couple of years as big favorites. No such case on Sunday. Zay Flowers definitely, kind of popped off a couple of touchdowns. He is now wide receiver 10 on the year in fantasy. The first receiver to go over 100 yards against the Broncos, and Lamar Jackson turned in his fourth career performance with a perfect 158.3. Is that right? Passer rating.
Something like that. That's one of those numbers that just like sticks in your head from elementary school. I think that's correct. 158.3 is the QB rating for Lamar. Only attempted 19 passes. He was 16 of 19 for 280 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, this was a dominant performance, certainly by Baltimore, but kind of took a little bit for this offense to get going. They get an interception of Bo Nix on the second play of the game, and you think, all right, we're off and running. And then the Ravens end up getting sacked out of field goal range. So, a little bit of a sloppy start there, but then the Ravens flip the switch. They score on 7 consecutive drives after that early letdown. 7.3 yards per play on the afternoon for Baltimore compared to just 4.7 for the Denver Broncos. Ravens number 1 in the NFL so far, unsurprisingly, in yards per play on the season. 7.1 is the number. If they can keep this up, John, no team since 2000 has ever finished over 7 yards per play. Nobody's even gotten to exactly 7 in the last 25 years. The best show on turf, greatest show on turf, Rams, currently hold that record over the last 25, 6.98 yards per play. So Baltimore kind of feels like this has been a historic offense, and it really has halfway through the season. You mentioned Zay Flowers. Really did most of his work in the first half. 4 for 111 and 2 touchdowns before halftime. Lamar was 11 of 12 passing for over 200 yards in the first half. We saw Derrick Henry involved early. We saw Derrick Henry involved late. 9 carries at the half. Only had 11 total all of last week in that disaster game against Cleveland. So it's good to see Baltimore recommit to the run. Ravens only ran 51 offensive plays with Lamar Jackson on the field. They ended up pulling him late in this game once it was decided. And in terms of the snaps, it was interesting. Rashad Bateman actually led the Ravens receivers in snaps at 35. Zay Jones had 30. And then Deontay Johnson only played 17 snaps. Was not targeted at all. So we kind of wondered, how much do we see of Deontay Johnson? Most of these receivers that we've seen over the last couple of weeks who get traded midweek, there's been a soft introduction. That's exactly what it was for Deontay. And we actually saw a lot of tight end usage, believe it or not, for the Baltimore Ravens as they went with more of those run sets as the game went along. So a lot of Andrews, a lot of Charlie Kohler. Isaiah Likely only finished with 17 snaps as well.
Yes, I am a little bit worried about Isaiah Likely's fantasy viability right now. It seems like as the season's gone on, losing out on snaps a little bit. Mark Andrews kind of getting himself a little bit more involved as he rounds back into form. And, this offense kind of shape-shifting a little bit where, the receivers are livelier part of this offense than they have been basically the entire Lamar Jackson era. So it just it leaves kind of crumbs for everyone that's not Mark Andrews or Zay Flowers. So that's something to consider if you're in like those deeper leagues, 2 tight end leagues, tight end premium leagues, where Likely has been a viable guy. It seems like that now you kind of have to think about it a little bit harder on a basis. And going back to your historical lens for viewing this Ravens offense thus far in the DVOA era, this Ravens team through 9 weeks, the third best on record behind only the 2018 Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes' first year. We remember that. And then the 2007 Patriots, they were pretty good too until
team.
Yeah, they did lose the Super Bowl though. Just so everyone remembers.
A lot of people I think forget that. I'll be interested to see. I mean, it's a tough stretch of defenses coming up for Baltimore, including this game against Denver, right? I mean, this is one of the 3 best defenses in the NFL by most metrics coming into this one. They'll fall a little bit after giving up 41. They're home for the Bengals, short week on Thursday. Then they go to Pittsburgh, to the Chargers, and then home for the Eagles. So obviously all these very winnable games for Baltimore. They'll probably be favored in each of those games, but a lot of difficult defenses coming up on the schedule. One more note on Zay Flowers. You mentioned the big day for him. 4th in the NFL now in yak yardage on the year, total yak. So he's behind only Khalil Shakir. Chris Godwin is still number 2, which is incredible. He's now missed 2 straight games, or will miss a second straight game. And then Jamar Chase ahead of Zay Flowers as well. But yeah, you watch these Raven games and, so much of it is after the catch for Zay Flowers. Cortland Sutton had himself a really nice day, played almost double the snaps of any receiver for the Broncos. Obviously, he's far and away their number 1 guy. Also threw a touchdown in which Bo Nix basically mossed a Ravens defender. And that made it a one-score game. Like this was still it was in the meaningful portion of the game. This defender just never turned around. Not a great look when you have a quarterback, specifically a white rookie quarterback, mossing you in the end zone.
No, it's really not. That was a beautiful play design from Denver. I believe that Romo noted that was lifted straight off the Philly special, but executed to perfection. Bo Nix, athletic guy, I will say. But even still, a tough look for one Marcus Williams who had been benched last week against the Browns for lack of performance. So, this Denver team, 5-4 now. I mean, they're still kind of in the fight. I think that, you'd probably take the Chargers over them the rest of the way in the West as far as a potential wild card representative. But I do think that they could potentially be a team that needs to add some firepower in the wide receiver room by the trade deadline on Tuesday. Anything else here?
Yeah, it's just really tough stretch of schedule for Denver. A huge level up in competition. Part of the reason that I like Baltimore in this game, it was a little counterintuitive, but you saw the big number at the beginning of the week and you're like, man, this feels like it should be like 7.5. Ravens looked terrible last week. Broncos look great. There's a big difference in facing Spencer Rattler and Bryce Young in back-to-back weeks and then going up against Lamar, who is now back to being the MVP favorite at DraftKings at plus 250. Broncos go to the Chiefs and then they're home for the Falcons over their next 2 games. Feel like you probably got to win one of those, to hang on to that wild card spot. They are currently the 7 right now in the AFC, but it could be any of, Denver, Indy, Cincy. The Jets aren't even that far out of it. They're only 2 games behind the 7 right now. So even if they do lose the next 2, I mean, Denver's going to be in the mix. They banked enough early wins that, probably only takes 9 wins to get one of those wild card spots, but important stretch coming up for Denver.
No question about it. And speaking of one of those teams, the Falcons, they hosted the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday. And I'm just going to kind of start at the end here when it comes to the Cowboys. They're a team that I think a lot of people had kind of written them off going into yesterday. And you could theoretically maybe twist yourself into saying like, okay, you're playing a Falcons team that's like a high variance team. You're a Cowboys team back against the wall. Maybe you can get it done here and give yourself a little bit of hope. But it does kind of feel like that the vibe inside the Dallas, locker room or coming out of Dallas, Jerry Jones included, is just like, this is still a team with some legs. This is a team that can make a run. This is a team that can win and win big. And I don't think anyone outside of the greater DFW area believe that. And I think yesterday is just another, notch in that belt to prove that Dallas is just, this group doesn't have it. Yesterday was a tough one for them. Dak Prescott obviously gets hurt in that game that alters things, but it didn't really feel like they were overly threatening to win this one. At any point. Zeke Elliott isn't showing up to meetings. The defense is all banged up. I don't really know what the fix is for this team, but I don't think that necessarily even like firing Mike McCarthy is like something that's going to give this team a jolt. It's weird when the Cowboys are irrelevant the way that they are right now. But I mean, look at it. Like reality, they are 13th in the NFC standings right now. Like you have two teams in your division that are 7-2. Like it's getting late early in Dallas.
Yeah, it feels like this was the final nail in the coffin. If we're being realistic, you don't want to be overly negative, but you got to play Philly next week. You got to go to Houston. That'll be healthier. No, sorry, that's a home game against Houston in 2 weeks, but that'll be a healthier Texans team, likely with Nico Collins back. And then you play the Commanders for the first time the week after that. I mean, we knew this wouldn't be an easy stretch of schedule. Lions, Niners, Falcons in consecutive weeks. You had to win at least one. You knew you couldn't go 0-3, and that's exactly what they did. We saw. I'm sure everybody listening to this has seen the clip of Dak Prescott mouthing something that I cannot say on this podcast regarding his own team. I will say Dallas had more first downs. They ran 18 more plays. They won time of possession. They won the yardage battle. This wasn't a total beatdown, but you're right. You never really felt like, the Cowboys had a chance to win this game. Even after Drake London, went out, didn't play in the second half. You're like, all right, maybe that could swing things. Just didn't at all. It did come down to, I mean, the Cowboys had a reasonable onside kick chance, with a minute 30 left. If they get that, all of a sudden, and you can see that happening against the Falcons because things like that happen against Atlanta. They just let these teams hang around. But it was another uninspiring effort for Dallas. This Atlanta defense had 6 sacks on the year coming in, 6, fewest in the NFL by a mile. They get to Dak 3 times in this game. Like you said, Dak ended up leaving. I believe it was late in the third quarter. All of a sudden, Cooper Rush is out there. CeeDee Lamb got banged up as well, was really favoring that shoulder toward the end of the game, kept trying to play through it, but you just almost felt bad for him, especially with the game being lost. And, Dallas now, I mean, they're 6.5-point dogs, against the Eagles this week. I think there's some serious thought that at least one of CD and Dak could not be out there. And obviously you're going to have a tough time winning without either of them. We knew the Dallas Cowboys cannot run the ball. That was once again the case, although Rico Dowdle actually ran it okay. 12 for 75, 6.3 yards per pop, felt kind of empty. They actually did a pretty reasonable job slowing down the Atlanta ground game. This should have been a smash spot on paper for Bijan Robinson, who got the workload, 19 carries, but only 86 yards for him, did not find the end zone. Still gave you a really nice week, though, in PPR, 7 for 59 through the air. Kyle Pitts coming off a huge week. He sees 1 target in this game. Really didn't play a whole lot in the second half. Atlanta kind of shut it down and went with a run-heavy scheme, as you would expect. Dallas got a big break early in this game. Kirk Cousins, sack fumble. Dallas takes over. They immediately go 4 and out and ran like a Jacksonville Jaguars jet sweep for a loss of 3 on 4th and short instead of just trying to plunge it through or doing literally anything other than that. The Darnell Mooney touchdown in the second quarter felt like this really broke the game open, or just a gorgeous play design. I've been very critical of the Atlanta Falcons play calling and decision-making this year, but this was a gorgeous play, almost like a makeshift legal pick where they had 3 receivers bunched out to the right. Mooney, kind of goes in and around the other 2 receivers, and all 3 Dallas defenders just end up in a crowd running into each other. And there's Darnell Mooney streaking wide open for a touchdown. And then we saw after that, Dallas kind of went into desperation mode. They're going for it on 4th down. They ran one of the most obvious, worst fake punts ever, which should have been picked off, but it was actually a great job by the receiver to clearly interfere with the defensive back. And I'm like, how did they not call that? He's grabbing his hand. And apparently you could just do whatever you want on a fake punt. There's no pass interference on fake punts.
No rules, just right. It's an Outback Steakhouse play.
That's right.
Going back to the Falcons and their offense, there is something to be said where us fantasy guys can maybe pat ourselves on the back a little bit, because we all saw so much potential in this offense the last couple of years when you have Drake London, Bijan, and Kyle Pitts, and there's nothing to show for it. It's like, okay, it has to be better now that you get Kirk Cousins. A real quarterback changes this offense. And they have 2 receivers in the top 10 in between Darnell Mooney, crazy, wide receiver 9 right now, and Drake London. Hopefully he won't be out long or just beyond what happened yesterday with that hip and oblique issue. And Kyle Pitts, even with the kind of dud yesterday, is tight end 4. So Kirk Cousins, he does kind of like his numbers are largely buoyed by the huge games, like the one that he had against the Bucks and yesterday, going 19 of 24 for 3 touchdowns. But even still, like if you were willing to take the plunge on this Falcons offense in fantasy this year, I think you got to say that you're pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, it got off to a really rocky start, right? That terrible game in week 1 against Pittsburgh. Kirk Cousins can't move. They're not running any play action, and they've gotten successively better and better in each week. And obviously, they're looking like the class of that division right now. A couple other notes here. Kirk Cousins, like you said, he was sharp again, 19 of 24, 222 and 3 touchdowns. Over the last 2 weeks, he is 42 of 53 for 498, 7 touchdowns and no picks. And then last note, I was watching this right before bed last night. A good note by Dan Orlovsky from ESPN. The Falcons scored on their second drive of the game. It was a touchdown from Kirk Cousins to Drake London. And you're thinking, how did Drake London get so open? It's almost like nobody followed him. Dallas had 10 men on the field on that game, or on that play, excuse me. Just that kind of game, that kind of season for the Dallas Cowboys. Those crushing mistakes week after week. And yeah, I think we can officially stick a fork in this Dallas team, especially if CD or Dak isn't out there next week against Philly. I mean, that's the must win of all must wins. You lose that one, then we're not even having this. Yeah, maybe they can sneak back in conversation. It's just too competitive in the NFC.
Yeah, it's NFC is loaded. It's been really, it's just so top heavy right now. I mean, you can run it down like 6-7 teams and you're like, wow, these teams are, head and shoulders above Dallas. And, our guy Mario Puig likes to draw this analogy when he's doing some player analysis. It was like, oh, when this guy's out there, they're playing 10 on 11. If you're the Cowboys, you don't want to like literally play 10 on 11, especially when you're in a red zone situation and Drake London's on the other side. Before we get on over to Bills-Dolphins, we got a message from our friends over at DK Pick6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-788-897777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
And look at that. We're back in action here. We're going up to Orchard Park, where the Bills and the Dolphins squared off. The Bills moved to 8-0 under Josh Allen against the Dolphins. When the game is in Buffalo, Josh Allen's dominance of the Dolphins extends far beyond that. Generally, he basically has a 305 area code on his cell phone at this point. But this game was a good bit more competitive than I thought. I kind of felt like looking at the board last week, given what we know about the Bills, given what we've seen from the Dolphins, even if it's kind of like a weird, incomplete sample, given the amount of time that Tua missed. They lose that game to the Cardinals last week, and you're like, oh boy, well, going up to Buffalo is not going to really fix that wagon. But, the offense for the second week in a row scored more than 25 points. So like there is something to be said for that. Mm-hmm. This offense does have a little bit of juice to it now that Tua is back in the fold. But when push came to shove, Buffalo finds a way.
Buffalo finds a way. It was a 61-yarder from Tyler Bass, who's had his issues this year, had his issues in this game, in fact, and ends up banging one through. Just a monster kick. You could tell he put his entire body into that one. Bills got the ball back with about 1:30 after giving up the game-tying touchdown, and were able to get into range. A nice 9-play drive in only 1:33 to basically take that one all the way down. So good to see Tyler Bass, kind of have his redemption. I know Josh Allen was hyping him up after the game, but like you said, I mean, Miami won most of the major stats that you look at here. More total yards, more yards per play. Both teams committed only one turnover. Miami had more first downs. They won the time of possession battle. I mean, this was a very, very even game. I will say they got a big break early on. Brutal drop that turned into an interception by Keon Coleman inside the 5-yard line. Probably if he brings that in, he probably works his way into the end zone. At the very least, you think Buffalo punches it in on one of the next plays. Absolute worst case scenario, you get the chip shot field goal. So that took points off the board. And, at that point, as somebody who was on the Bills in the Circa contest, I'm like, man, I don't know if we're going to get this one today. It's just kind of one of those early breaks. Buffalo also had a 1st and 10 at the Miami 11 that 2 plays later was a 1st and 30 at the 31. Back-to-back holds. One of them wiped out a really sick Josh Allen touchdown run. Kind of a phantom call, in my opinion. It was a really cool play by Josh Allen. So those were 2 big breaks inside the red zone, deep in Dolphins territory that went against Buffalo. I actually didn't think Josh Allen was all that good in the first half, especially a lot of low balls in this game. Had open receivers, just kind of throwing it a little too hard, throwing it into the dirt. Buffalo only had 4.2 yards per play in the first half, only 118 total yards on a Dolphins defense that just hasn't really been all that good. Miami ran the ball pretty well on a difficult Buffalo defense, 6.2 yards per play for the game. But yet again, John, a crushing fumble by Raheem Mostert early in the third quarter. They do this every single week. Fumbled at the Buffalo 41. That led to a touchdown for the Bills for them to take the lead. We also almost had an Odell Beckham fumble deep in Bills territory. Ended up being ruled down by contact. But, man, these last 3 or 4 weeks feels like no team has had worse fumble luck than Miami.
Yeah, they need to work on the ball security. High and tight, folks. Please.
Always.
Beyond that, Tyreek, pretty standard game for him. Not the monster game, but 4 for 80 on 5 targets. Achane, like you said, ran it well. Waddle with one of the all-time bizarre stat lines.
Yeah.
2 catches for -4 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, he was victimized by the end of game scenario where, Dolphins are trying to pitch it around and like everybody else is pitching and it never, it's not going to work. They're deep in their own territory. We've seen this over and over. And if anything, I'm thinking, man, we need a fumble here. Buffalo brings this thing in. We could get it. We could sneak out a cover on the last play of the game. But the ball goes to Waddle and he just runs like so far backwards to the point where he had nowhere to pitch it and just had to go down. So that's where he ended up losing, a decent amount of that yardage. But yeah, just a weird game for him. I mean, just a disappointing season overall for Jalen Waddle. I mean, Tua being back in the mix. Yeah, you got you the touchdown, but it hasn't been the season that you thought it might be for him. Khalil Shakir, I don't really have any notes on him. I just wrote down during the game. He is very good. Only played 35 of 66 snaps. We actually saw a lot more of Keon Coleman. We saw a lot more of Mac Hollins. We saw more heavier run sets for Buffalo. Josh Allen, despite having that bad first half, just made some incredible plays. Decision-making wise, you could question it. I mean, he flipped a touchdown to one of their backup tight ends, Morris, for the go-ahead score. It was a very Brett Favre-like play. Yeah. It was basically the same type of play that Jordan Love got a pick-6 on in the late window, but it worked out for Josh Allen. The game finished, by the way, after a relatively pedestrian and kind of boring first half, 7 consecutive drives. We had touchdown, field goal, touchdown, 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 field goal in the second half. So things picked up, kind of got the back and forth game that we thought we would. Ray Davis had a long touchdown, a 63-yard reception, just kind of untouched, just a breakdown by the Miami defense. He did only play 9 snaps, and we saw obviously more of James Cook, but Ray Davis carried or was targeted on 6 of his 9 snaps.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe Buffalo needs to do a little bit better job than tipping off the defense. That if Ray Davis is in the game, he's probably getting the ball. But I think when Ray Davis gets the ball, usually good things happen. So I'd like to see him get in the mix a little bit more. James Cook's obviously having an excellent season, so you don't want to do it at the detriment to him, but find ways to get Ray Davis on the field. I think that would just kind of add another element here as far as Buffalo's offense goes. Obviously, they were without Amari Cooper yesterday. But still managed to get it done. And Khalil Shakir, I actually did have a note on him. So he goes 6 for 7 for 50 yards. His catch rate of 94.7% is the league leader, not surprisingly, among players with at least 45 targets. No one within even 14% of him. Jamar Chase would be next up at 81%. Is next up. So. That's insane for Chase, and he has obviously a bit of a higher volume and higher ADOT than Shakir would, but even still, basically Josh Allen and Khalil Shakir have some sort of mind melt going on.
Yeah, nasty business going on in Buffalo. Like you said, no Amari Cooper, and as we mentioned earlier, Khalil Shakir, number 1 in the NFL in yards after the catch, and that certainly checks out when you watch this team.
Absolutely. Let's get on over to Jamar Chase's team, the Cincinnati Bengals. This is an offense that just, when it's on, it really is still among the best in football. That we'll have to see if the defense can kind of get things figured out or if they add anybody at the deadline. But the Bengals pretty thoroughly handled the Raiders. They even survived the okey doke rope-a-dope trick by the Raiders of going from Gardner Minshew to Desmond Ridder. No, they were not fooled.
Yeah, those tricky Raiders. You never know. This is what, the fourth time this year that Gardner Minshew has either been benched in game or between weeks. He always finds a way to bounce back. He's going to get the job back at some point. But yeah, we did see some Ridder. He took over midway through the third. I do wonder what the record is, by the way, for most times benched in a season. Like, it takes a special set of circumstances to do what Gardner Minshew has done, to be benched 4 times at the midway point. I will say, so you look at the final score, 41-24, finally got the wake-up game for the Bengals offense, playing without T. Higgins for a second straight week. But this was another predictably slow start for Cincy. They go down 7-0. Vegas kind of seems to do this every week. They start fast. You're like, right away, you're like, oh boy, here we go. We got ourselves a game. And then like the onslaught of mistakes just kind of unfold over the next 3 quarters. But Vegas is averaging more first quarter points this season than Buffalo, more first quarter points than Detroit or Kansas City. That they do have a way of like always seeming to script a decent first drive before everything falls apart. Joe Burrow nearly had a tip ball picked deep in Las Vegas territory that kind of would have changed this game. Probably doesn't change the outcome, but would have at least made it a little bit more competitive. I still think when you watch the Cincy offense, it's a little Jets-like. It's a little late Packers, Aaron Rodgers-like, where you're just asking Joe Burrow to do so much. You're asking him to make really tough throws, throw into tight windows. You're asking receivers to make difficult catches in traffic or along the sidelines. It works against Vegas. I still am skeptical of this team against better competition. We did see a very bad sack fumble by Minshew that led to an easy Bengals touchdown. I think that's what started the thought process of maybe we should get this guy out of the game for Antonio Pierce. So I think just doesn't like Gardner Minshew. I think those are 2 opposite personalities. I don't see those guys hanging out a ton outside of the facility. Joe Burrow did throw a pick-6 in this game late. It was already decided, but Jack Jones just jumped a quick pass. I believe he made the exact same play against the Chargers last year in that crazy beatdown game where he just, jumped the route, ran it completely untouched. We saw Brock Bowers get in the end zone for only the second time this season. That was in major garbage time at that point, but still counts all the same for fantasy. And, Jamar Chase is still the wide receiver 1 in total PPR points on the year. And, part of that is the Bengals have played one more game than a lot of teams, but still it doesn't feel like he's having a wide receiver 1 type of year. Like, the splash weeks just haven't really been there. I guess he's just consistently giving you that, 15 to 19 every week.
You're frustrated from yesterday that they, Joe Burrow throws 5 touchdowns and Chase isn't in on any of them, right? So that's a disappointing thing. I think you can point to like the Carolina game and the Baltimore game as the 2 times that he really just kind of like went thermonuclear, and otherwise it's been good, not great. So I'm definitely with you there, where it's just we haven't truly gotten the monster wide receiver season from anybody. I mean, the attrition, I think it really league-wide playing into that. But, he does tend to crush the Ravens. So, this game on Thursday, I do imagine that he'll bounce back. Chase Brown out of the backfield had a huge day without Zach Moss taking anything off of his plate. So 120 yards plus a pretty nifty receiving touchdown that he had. And then this was my donkey move of the week for DFS purposes. The RotoWire optimizer always gives good ideas, and I always think I'm smarter than the computer. And it's kept saying Mike Gesicki, man, Mike Gesicki. And I'm like, absolutely not. No way. And no, five catches, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns for like 3,100. That probably would have helped.
Probably would have helped. Yeah, I think we can say that. Saw a lot more Gesicki, of course, being more involved with no T. Higgins, 6 targets for him. Yeah, huge day for Chase Brown. I mean, he was the entire offense, really. I mean, the Bengals ran an insane amount of plays in this game. So like Chase Brown was able to carry 27 times, and Burrow was still able to attempt 39 passes. Normally, when you're winning by 3 scores and you have a running back with that kind of usage, it's like a 20 of 25 type of passing day. But the Bengals just dominated this game to that degree. There was no false final here. They won every metric by a mile. Vegas, by the way, leads the NFL with 19 turnovers on the year. Not surprising. Feels like they're good for about 3 every game. A couple other notes on the Vegas side, then we can move on. Nice day for Jacoby Myers. He was able to salvage that. I was forced to start him in my NFFC league because I have DK Metcalf and T. Higgins there. So we were scraping the bottom of the barrel for receivers. So that one actually ended up working out. And then we know the Raiders can't run the ball. I mean, there's just almost no fantasy value in this backfield whatsoever. Zamir White did plunge in a touchdown early on. He finished with 6 carries for 10 yards. The Raiders ran for 2.9 yards per carry as a team. We saw a lot of Amir Abdullah. They're throwing the ball heavily in the second half. There's just not much there, man. I mean, it was kind of an even split between Abdullah, Alexander Madison, and Zamir White, but I don't have any interest in rostering any of these guys. The Raiders and the Cowboys are the only teams that have rushed for under 700 yards total as a unit this season. Vegas, of course, dead last in rushing yards per game.
Yeah, I can't respect a team that can't run the ball, especially if you're bad, at least be able to run it. I mean, come on, 6 for 10 from Zeus is no bueno. And then tying off the Gesicki detail, Eric All had actually looked kind of impressive as a rookie, not high volume or anything, but he suffered a knee injury. His last year in college at Iowa too. So, I mean, that really stinks for Eric All, especially if anyone had invested in him in Dynasty. You kind of have to wait a little bit longer for the returns on that, but that probably does give Gesicki a decent little runway here. And Jermaine Burton, even with T. Higgins being sidelined, was a healthy scratch for this game. Jermaine Burton, when he's on the field, things happen, but he seems to have trouble getting himself on the field, which is frustrating.
Yeah, weird situation where we heard Joe Burrow hyping him up throughout the week. Want to get him more involved with no T. Higgins, and then he skips a walkthrough and ends up being inactive. So I don't know, man. Obviously, we knew there were some character concerns coming in, but for a quarterback like Joe Burrow to go out of his way to praise you, to essentially imply that, yeah, we really want to get you involved this week. It's like of all the walkthroughs to skip, why that one?
Completely confounding stuff from him. But he could definitely help this offense, especially if Higgins is to miss additional time. Let's stay in the great state of Ohio. Browns, Chargers. One of your great calls from the pod last week. The under. It's like the Chargers games don't even get into 40-point territory. How is this total at 43? You were right. It did not challenge that total. Justin Herbert looked good in this one, and we got Jameis. Every week it's going to be different, different variations of the same idea. Like Winston can either have a game like he did against Baltimore or a game like he did yesterday with 3 interceptions and a YPA under 6. So, I mean, that is part of the Jameis experience. To quote, I guess, the first Batman movie, I told you it would take you places, the Jameis experience. I didn't tell you it was going to take you places you wanted to go, and that was the case on Sunday for Cleveland fans.
Yeah, I mean, Jameis kind of played the same game as last week in a lot of ways. The Chargers just made the interceptions that the Ravens dropped over and over. I mean, Jameis was skirting the line last week and had like 3 throws that should have been easy picks. All those turned into picks this week. At one point, he had 3 interceptions over a 5-drive span in the second half. Threw one in the end zone as well. That kind of set off all of this. And you mentioned I was on the under. That was one of my official plays over at Bookies this week as well. And I did feel great about it early on. I mean, this was a 20-3 game at the half. That was not where I thought we would be. I thought this would be like 10-3 at the half. And both teams were just passing and passing and passing. Like, this is not what I thought we would get from the Chargers. At one point, early in the third quarter, I believe it was, we had 3 full drives take place that took a total of 2 minutes and 30 seconds off the clock. Back-to-back 52 and 24-second drives. So at that point, I'm just counting down. I'm watching every single play. I'm watching every possession, just counting down to try to hit this under. And instead of, the Chargers had a multi-score lead. I think they were up 3 scores at the time, and they just kept passing. They just kept passing and passing. They refused to run the ball. So it didn't really go to script necessarily, but thankfully with all the turnovers, we had a missed field goal as well that contributed to the under. The second half, after it was 20-3 at halftime, and consecutive drives for both teams went interception, punt, 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 interception, punt, out on downs, missed field goal, interception, punt, blocked field goal. So really could not have asked for a better second half as far as an under better goes.
Just how he drew it up. So that, that everything equilibrium was reached there in the second half. This game had no business going over 43. But beyond that, J.K. Dobbins had his best game of the season for fantasy purposes. Not his most yards, but his most since week 6 against Denver. Obviously opened the season with a couple of 100-yard game performances, but had the 2 touchdowns to help his cause yesterday. And Quentin Johnston, pretty awesome in his return from a 2-game absence. 118 yards. I believe that's the first 100-yard game of his career.
It's got to be. It's got to be. I'm not even going to double check that. I'm just going to assume that's correct. Two big time broken coverages that led to touchdowns for the Browns. The first touchdown of the game, Josh Palmer just running wide open in the corner of the end zone, and then the Quentin Johnston play, he had a long touchdown as well, 66-yarder, where there was just a complete breakdown in that secondary. Chargers nearly scored, by the way, on a very well designed lateral play right before the half. Like, there was a moment where I thought Josh Palmer was taking that in, and then he kind of reversed field, and obviously it was kind of a 1 out of 100 type of play, but about as close as we've seen a team get on the pitch it all over the place type of play. Jameis was sacked 4 times in the first half. Both tackles were out there for Cleveland, Jack Conklin and Jedrick Wills. So I don't know if that's a Jameis issue. I don't know if you just chalk that up to the Chargers coverage plus pass rush, but Herbert and Jameis combined for 11 sacks through 3 quarters. Both ended up being sacked 6 times on the day. So like, neither passing game was necessarily humming. The Chargers just had those big plays that kind of carried them. The Browns running game, total disaster, man. I know the Nick Chubb return is a nice story. He went 15 for 39 in this game. The Browns were 3.3 yards per carry as a team. This is now 3 straight wildly inefficient games for Nick Chubb and the running game overall. Chargers running game also slowing down a bit. I know this is a tough matchup against Cleveland. Saw a couple big plays out of Dobbins. Like you mentioned, the 2 touchdowns, had a fine fantasy day, but this is not a team that's just like ripping off 7 yards per carry. Felt like early in the year, it's like, oh man, who's going to stop this running game? It has slowed down a little bit. And I think as they play better teams, that could be an issue. Chargers get the Titans this week. That should be a very winnable game. The Browns play at the New Orleans Saints. That might be the already stay away of the week for me. And then in terms of other fantasy notes, Judy, Tillman combined for 21 targets. Both were decent as far as fantasy goes. But a bit of a letdown, certainly, for the Browns coming off of last week.
Exactly. If you're Cleveland, you're hoping that you can kind of draw some momentum from a game like last week and carry it over. I mean, it's not like the Chargers are world beaters and you're at home. I mean, there's ways in which you can see the Browns winning that game, but just wasn't meant to be. My last note on this game is a dachshund got on the field and was running around. Yep. So shout out to that dachshund, whoever you may be, wherever you may be. Let's go down to Music City. Let's hit that Tennessee-New England game. Kind of fun.
Weird kind of fun. Yeah.
Better than I expected. Bars on the floor.
It was a football game, that's for sure. I mean, we got overtime. I think we cleared the what did that close at 36.5? We did get to 37 total points in this game thanks to that overtime period. I mean, this was as ugly as you thought it would be, right? I mean, neither team really played all that well, but Tennessee, I think part of the handicap, if you were on the Titans this week and you laid it out, on the podcast, was this team's piling up yardage. They're not piling up points, but they're putting up yards. And they outgained New England 400 to 295 in this game, 5.5 yards per play for Tennessee. It's not great, but for the Titans, that's pretty solid. Won the time of possession by about 10 minutes, which is a big deal. They were 7 of 16 on third downs. They drove right down the field for a touchdown to kind of set the tone. Ran a nice triple flea flicker to move the ball into the red zone late in the game. Ended up having to settle for a field goal on that drive due to penalties. That was an issue. 10 penalties on the day for Tennessee. Insane play, of course, by Drake May on the final play of regulation, just scrambling around. Kind of felt like he was in like slow motion the entire time. The Patriots offensive line was all over the place, specifically on that play. You had some guys were blocking 2 guys at once. Other guys, I think it was 74, Michael Jordan, was just not blocking anybody on that play. Around. And yet Drake May able to buy just enough time to find Ramondre Stevenson coming back to the ball in the end zone. Titans end up getting a field goal in overtime. Immediately after that, the Patriots are putting a drive together. Drake May, huge scramble to get a first down in overtime, bring them to around midfield. Very next play, whips a pass downfield into double coverage. He said the wind affected it. I believe him. Ended up just being a really easy game-losing interception.
Yeah, I mean, the guy basically could have called like a fair catch or something.
Yeah,
like that was. Yep. But I mean, beyond that, I mean, if you're a New England fan, you're almost like happy with that result. It's like you see some things from Drake May, but the race to the number 1 pick, it picks up some steam, and Carolina won. So you're still in the fight for Travis Hunter. But beyond Drake May, we talked about the athleticism and how he put that on display at North Carolina. 95 rushing yards for him. On the other side, Tony Pollard, really nice day, 28 carries. It's a big day of work from him. Goes for 128 yards. Calvin Ridley showing some signs of life, at least relative to where he was early in the season. A couple of fringe playable weeks, the last 2 weeks, certainly last week against the Lions, but not a ton of other notes here from me on this one.
No, it was a good day for Tony Pollard. He did have a touchdown called back on a penalty, so that that would have just kind of added even more to what was a solid fantasy day. Career high 28 carries for Tony Pollard, 128 yards, also had 3 catches for 26. Patriots couldn't run the ball, unsurprisingly. 10 carries for 16 yards for Ramondre Stevenson. You mentioned Drake May getting loose. That was kind of a hallmark of that offense yesterday. Like we mentioned, Tennessee did outgain New England by over 100 yards, dominated time of possession. And then the last note here, we don't need to spend much time on this one. The Patriots, it's been a guessing game week to week, especially with Drake May out there. You feel like there's more production to be had fantasy-wise in this receiving core, but good luck predicting who's going to be out there. We did see less rotating this week. There was kind of a defined top 3 of Kayshon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne, and Pop Douglas. Jalen Polk only played 9 snaps. I'll still say it every week. I think Hunter Henry is the most dependable option week to week in this passing game. He was targeted 8 times, 7 for 56. 23 targets for Hunter Henry over the last 3 games.
Yeah, he's just the old plow horse of that offense. I like Hunter Henry as a tight end too. And I think he's, I guess fringe given the tight end landscape, like kind of startable in regular leagues as well. It's never going to be sexy, but it's going to be efficient, and maybe he'll give you a touchdown once in a while. Let's get on over to Washington versus the Giants. This one up at the Meadowlands. I kind of viewed this as like a take care of business game for Washington, which is, usually you reserve that type of moniker for good teams, but I think Washington, passes the muster as far as that is concerned now. And they had to go up divisional opponent. That was a weird game. The first time they squared off back in week 2, obviously that was the kicker game for the Giants. And then Washington kind of rudely winning with all field goals in that one. It's kind of like the only flex you could do in that game, but they found a way. But yesterday it got a little close at the end, but Washington was able to get the win. Terry McLaurin, if you're a fantasy manager that started Terry McLaurin yesterday, if I told you that he had 2 catches, it was kind of best case Ontario. Both of them went for touchdowns.
Yeah, they sure did. Only targeted 3 times too, and 2 of those targets, of course, did find the end zone. Not a big yardage day for him whatsoever. This is a very evenly played game overall. A lot of the stats that we cite for every game were pretty much equal here. Washington did have a slight yards per play advantage, but the one big advantage that the Commanders had here is they did not turn the ball over, and the Giants did, and it was a big one. Daniel Jones fumbled in Washington territory on a sack and ended up kind of flipping the field. Washington goes down for the first score of the game. And after that, it was pretty back and forth, and obviously the Giants would like to have that possession back. Continue to just be so impressed with Jaden Daniels week to week. I mean, this was not a monster statistical game by him by any means. 15 of 22 for 209 and the 2 touchdowns to McLaurin, only 35 rushing yards on 8 carries, but bailed them out on a couple third downs. I mean, he is just such a cheat code on 3rd and 4th down, really. I mean, Washington, it feels like it's just automatic on those 4th downs right now. The threat of Jaden Daniels running, you get him out in space. You got a couple guys running in the flat. You can just give him an option, and he's just so dialed in. But there were a couple weird plays in this game. Like there was one late when the Giants were driving for a touchdown, and Malik Neighbors looked to me like he was tackled short of the sticks on 4th down. Washington weirdly just did not challenge it. It was very, very close, 50-50 maybe, but enough that you absolutely throw the flag there. And the Giants end up driving down and getting a touchdown, but it ended up being coming back then on a pick play, just kind of chaotic. But in general, thought it was very weird that Washington didn't throw the flag there. Giants put together a nice 13-play, 6-minute drive late in the game to make this a 1-score game, converted a couple 3rd and 4th downs on that drive. Daniel Jones, thankfully, ran a terrible play on the 2-point attempt to preserve us the cover in this game. That was huge. Commanders also had an interception on said drive that would have ended the game. Came back on another very weird defensive holding call. There was another play where the Commanders got a pick. They then fumbled, and then it was recovered by the Giants. But then there was a penalty on the play. It ended up being a personal foul. So that gave the Giants like a huge advantage there, 15 yards to set up that eventual touchdown that made it a 1-score game. Washington, by the way, like I said, they win the turnover battle 1-0 this week. How many times do you think the Commanders have turned the ball over this season?
Oh, it's got to be – you can count it on one hand, and I think you don't even need that many fingers.
The answer is 3. They've turned the ball over 3 times in 9 games. That is the fewest ever in the modern NFL. I think you got to go all the way back to like the 1930s for a team that's had fewer turnovers through 9 games. So that has obviously been part of the reason that they've been so successful, especially when you contrast it to the Raiders turning it over 19 times through 9 games. Washington 3rd in the NFL in yards per play, behind only Baltimore and San Francisco on the year. They were sitting at 6 yards per play on the year. This was certainly a below average offensive day for them. On the Giants side, Tyrone Tracy, he was solid again. I had a really big first half. I think he had like 55 rushing yards in the first half, was pretty much shut down in the second. No Brian Robinson, of course, for the Commanders. So we saw a relatively equal split between Chris Rodriguez and Austin Eckler. They both carried 11 times. Eckler got the touchdown. We did see some Jeremy McNichols as well. But that's all I have for this game, man. Commanders just continue to roll on.
Well, with that in mind, why don't we get to the main event of the early window? Yes. New Orleans Saints, Carolina Panthers. The Saints were 7.5-point favorites in this game. The Saints had Derek Carr back. The Carolina Panthers were the Carolina Panthers. But Carolina won. I mean, Dennis Allen, I believe, out of a job now as a result of that. And Michael Thomas really lighting it up on Twitter during this game as well.
Look, you lose to the Panthers, you get fired. It's that simple. So yeah, Dennis Allen officially gone. Felt like this was coming for a while. I did have Dennis Allen first coach fired, by the way, in the hopper.
Cash
but unfortunately, well, we can't because Robert Saleh, man, he was not the first coach fired. Couldn't just get a straight firing bet. Had to be the first coach. Darren Rizzi taking over now. He was their assistant head coach, their special teams coordinator as well. You kind of saw the writing on the wall here. After the game, Alvin Kamara, this was before the firing, was asked about just kind of the general direction of the team. And he said, quote, "We have confident guys, just may not be confident in something else." Just a weird quote. Yeah, I don't know if he's talking about Derek Carr. I don't know if he's talking about Dennis Allen, maybe both. Like you said, Michael Thomas was going at Derek Carr throughout this game. It was right after the Chris Olave injury where, Carr threw a hospital ball. Olave gets lit up. It's just like his 7th concussion. You just wonder, I mean, it's plausible. He left the game on a stretcher, man. He was at the hospital. It's like, it's possible that his season could be over. I mean, he's almost in the Tua zone when it comes to concussions. I will say the Saints had no business losing this game. As poorly as they played, losing Olave early on, whatever, they still should not have lost this game. They outgained Carolina 427 to 246. They won the turnover battle. They won time of possession by 10 minutes. They had 5.8 yards per play. Teams that outgain their opponent by 150 plus, run for 150 plus, and win the turnover battle were 275-0 coming into this game. If you're looking at how unlikely it was that the Saints somehow found a way to lose it, they had their chances to put this away late. They had 3 drives late in the game where all you got to do is just pick up a couple first downs. You could bring the clock down to the point where it becomes really uncomfortable for Carolina. Obviously, if you get a score in any of those drives, you're basically got this one in the bank. They had a 4th and inches at midfield on one of those drives and declined to go for it. They punted back to Carolina. And of course, Carolina goes down in 4 plays for the winning score. I'm not going to say this was a great Bryce Young effort by any means, but I will say the Panthers actually protected him pretty well. He was only sacked once. This is only the 2nd time in his career that he started a game and taken 1 sack. He's never had a game where he's not been sacked. So this is like best case scenario for Bryce Young, but this was not like some, offensive clinic by Carolina. It was just the Saints having opportunity after opportunity to closing out and basically declining to do so. The Saints also get the ball back. They're down 1 after the Carolina touchdown. They got a chance. There's enough time on the clock where you could at least work it into field goal range. They faced a 4th and 4. Derek Carr ends up being sacked earlier in the drive. So it's like, 3rd and 16. They pick up 12 on 3rd down. And what do you run there? You got to throw a fade to Cedric Wilson, which was obviously not caught. It never had a chance.
I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where, you have the game on your quad box, you're looking at it and you don't really feel necessarily like the Saints are dominating on the box score the way that they ended up being. And, I was checking in on those stats this morning, getting ready for the show. And yeah, I was pretty blown away by how much on paper the Saints were able to just outplay the Panthers. And yet, they come out with the loss. I mean, maybe it's good for the Saints in the end, that Allen is out of there, but I don't know what the path forward is. I mean, You have a Saints team that is perpetually in new and interesting forms of cap hell. They're going to be looking at that again. I mean, this Olave stuff is getting pretty concerning. You have Rashid Shaheed out for this season. Kamara's just kind of it. I mean, Cam Jordan said, "I'm sorry, fans. We lost to the Panthers. We don't do that." And then I think J.C. Horn clapped back at him and was like, we're 1-1 against you guys now, and I don't know who you're talking to at this point, or we have the same record. So I mean, things are bad right now in New Orleans. Yeah. We'll see if they get the post coach firing bump going into next week. And then my only other kind of fantasy relevant takeaway, other than Chuba having a nice day, Jatavian Sanders, rookie tight end.
Yeah.
A little bit of a nice game from him. 4 catches for 87.
Yeah, it wasn't a whole lot of fantasy takeaways here. Saints have obviously lost 7 in a row now, straight up, and they host the Falcons this week. They're only 3.5-point dogs at home in that game. Like you said, maybe you get some sort of post Dennis Allen bump. I could actually see it, right? Because the Saints have shown you got to go all the way back to weeks 1 and 2, but we know there's more to unlock with this offense. I mean, it's just been a tale of the first 2 games, and then the next 7 games have looked completely different. But yeah, fantasy wise, not a whole lot here. I mean, post Deontay Johnson, we saw a lot of David Moore. We saw a lot of Xavier Legette, who did briefly leave this game with an injury, but came back. Those 2 played by far the most snaps at receiver for Carolina. A lot of people were on Jalen Coker in DFS, myself included. 3 targets, only played 24 snaps, which was a little bit disappointing. We did cash our Taysom Hill anytime touchdown, though, John. We just had a feeling this would be a Taysom Hill game. Found his way into the end zone. 4 catches for 41 yards, 5 carries for 19 yards for Taysom.
Yes. So for pivoting off of Gesicki, it wasn't a complete disaster because it was all for Taysom, and he
there we go.
Turned in a solid day, relatively speaking, but certainly no Gesicki. But still, anytime that there's a Taysom Hill game, you love to get some action on it. Before we get to the afternoon window, we got a message from our pals over at Circa. It's football season, and the best place to catch the games is at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas, featuring the best pool in history. We can confirm this. Stadium Swim, 3 levels, 6 pools, and a 143-foot diagonal screen. Whether it's Thursday, Sunday, Saturday, or Monday, Stadium Swim is America's favorite place to watch football. No matter the size of your group, Stadium Swim is the place for you. From owner suites to cabanas, daybeds to stadium booths, there are seating choices for everyone. And the best part, Stadium Swim is open 365 days a year. With the temperature-controlled pools, it's a great place to catch the games all season long. Stadium Swim, located at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Book today at circalasvegas.com. All right. Let's unpack your Jags. I thought that they showed some fight, some moxie in this one up against Philly. Philly breaking out the Kelly Greens, though. That's always like a pretty intimidating look from them. I think it's their best look by far. But Jacksonville was kind of on the mat in the second half there, and Trayvon Walker has that big play. Kind of an interesting play where I kind of felt like it was dubious as to whether Saquon Barkley was down by contact or not, but they really kind of quickly ruled that it's like, no, he fumbled that on his own, and the Jags are back in this bad boy. And from there, things got pretty interesting.
They briefly got interesting. Yeah, this is a very Jags game overall. They have now covered 3 games in a row. Something worth noting. Got to find any positives that we can for this Jags team. The Jags began this game by immediately muffing a punt. Just a very Jags play, get a nice stop, and then some guy I've never heard of, Austin Trammell, for some reason is returning punts, buffs the heck out of that one. Hurts to Saquon 2 plays later for a touchdown. We had another turnover for Jacksonville, 2 picks for Trevor Lawrence. We'll get to the second one later. The first one, it was ruled interception. It was basically a fumble where he threw it to ETN, just totally mishandles it, just kind of scooped it into the arms of Zach Bond. Just been that kind of year for Lawrence, been that kind of year for ETN. Just a brutal play to give the Eagles another touchdown before the half. At the half, I mean, this was about as one-sided as it gets. Eagles probably should have been up by more. The Jaguars had 31 yards of offense in the first half, 1.7 yards per play through the first 2 quarters. Lawrence, of course, threw the crushing pick in the end zone late in the game, after Jacksonville gets gifted, a final chance to go down and win the game. I mean, you're only down 5 at that point, and they were able to work it all the way into the red zone. On a first down, you're throwing a jump ball to Dearness Johnson, your 3rd string running back, for some reason, which speaks to just kind of the lack of options that Jacksonville has right now. They did have Brian Thomas in this game. He played his normal amount of snaps, but was only targeted 3 times, just didn't really quite look like himself, wasn't getting that separation. No Gabe Davis, no Christian Kirk, obviously, for Jacksonville. So we saw way too much Parker Washington on the Jag side of things. This was a 22-0 game late in the third quarter. It was over. And then Nick Sirianni decided to go sicko mode. Decision making was just all over the place throughout this entire game. He went for 2 reckless 4th downs deep in Jacksonville territory, easy field goal range. You just kind of build on that lead. You're already up big. Didn't get either of those. That kept Jacksonville alive. Late in the game, up 5, they decide to kick a 57-yarder instead of going for it on 4th and 4. They've been going for these 4th downs the entire game when they don't need to. And now this is the one where it's like, all right, if we get this, the game's basically over. And instead they line up for, this 20% field goal. Of course, it goes off the upright and you hand the Jags the ball with great field position. Because it's the Jags, you're able to get away with it. But just a bizarre game for Nick Sirianni. It was almost like a Dan Campbell type of game for him, where he was just like, I'm scoring on this drive. I don't care. We are getting a touchdown here. He was doing it on 2-point conversions as well. Like, nothing really made sense, and then again, to not go for it on 4th and 4 when that's all you've been doing the whole game and you have a chance to close it out was just bizarre to me. Saquon obviously was great. 27 carries, 159 yards. We all saw the reverse hurdle. Very cool. Almost got injured on that play.
That is one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
That was insane, man. I don't know how you even generate like enough kinetic energy or whatever it is to make that maneuver. But yeah, he was great. Good to see him get in the end zone after Jalen Hurts has just been robbing him of all these short touchdowns the last couple of weeks. Quiet day for A.J. Brown, who did almost nothing in this game. Devontae Smith had a big, crazy one-handed catch in the back of the end zone to save a nice fantasy day for him. Grant Calcaterra, 5 for 30, as Dallas Goedert continues to miss time. And then on the Jaguars running back front, this is big for fantasy purposes. Travis Etienne was back in the mix. He was outsnapped by Tank Bigsby, 28-17. Bigsby outcarried Etienne 8-3. So I don't know what's going on with this Jags backfield. It feels like Bigsby is kind of the guy right now. There's still a chance to me that they could trade Etienne before the deadline tomorrow. We will see.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's trading for him, but yeah, I don't know.
The Cowboys would have been the team, but now their season's over.
Exactly. If I'm the Jags, like, I want Etienne in my backfield as they kind of turn the page next year. But yeah. I mean, if they can get a decent little return for him in some form or fashion, it does feel like Tank Bigsby is running well enough and he's, obviously younger on within his contract to where it's, maybe we can make it work.
What about the Chargers? Could the Chargers be a Travis Etienne team?
Well, I mean, things have just obviously not gotten well behind J.K. Dobbins, and you're always kind of worried about your depth situation when J.K. Dobbins is your lead guy. So I think that the Etienne would absolutely make some sense there. Why don't we hop on over to the Cards-Bears game? We got the I don't know what's going on with the Bears, but I give less credit to the Cardinals here. I mean, not like I give them no credit, but the Bears just were not. I mean, they were scoreless in 3 of those quarters. They scored 9 total points. Caleb Williams, 217 yards on 41 attempts. Roma Dunze had the nice day, but beyond that, I mean, this was all Arizona all the time.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot on this one. This was a total toss-up to me. The line indicated it as well. I think it was 1.5 in favor of Arizona at home. Bears defense, man, it was not a great defensive day against the run. There was a couple drives where it just felt like, and even the commentators acknowledged it, where they're like, it feels like Arizona's running the same play over and over again. And it's like, yeah, they are. James Conner is just getting 8 yards a carry on this Bears defense. The Bears are just so poorly coached, man. This comes through in so many ways every single week. Obviously, we saw it, on full display last week against Washington, but right before the half, there's like 10 seconds on the clock. It's a 1-score game at that point. Chicago's moving the ball well. They had 3 field goal drives in the second quarter. So at that point, you're still feeling okay. It's 9-14, and you're like, all right, we're getting the ball out of half. Let's just get a stop here. Arizona has the ball around midfield. I think it was at their own 47-yard line. At that point, you're probably thinking, all right, maybe we get a quick out and we could try a long field goal and hopefully we make it. They decide to run the ball with Amari DiMercato, and the Bears are in like this semi-prevent look, but then they bring a bunch of guys at the quarterback, and there's just nobody to tackle DiMercato, who goes untouched for a 53-yard touchdown that felt like it just kind of ended the game. I mean, that was such a wind out of your sails type of play. And then the Bears, they still get the ball coming out of half, chance to answer, emphatic 3-and-out to begin the second half. And that was basically that, man. At one point in this game, the Bears had a 10-play, 10-yard drive. If you're wondering how that's even possible, I'm not sure. Caleb Williams being sacked 6 times for minus 45 yards certainly helps. One random note here, the Cardinals had an incredible punt in this game that was downed inside the 1-yard line. Ended up leading to a safety a couple plays later. Bears committed a penalty in the end zone. That punt was down by somebody named Joey Blunt. And I will say, John, I had a friend in college who was a rapper who went by Joey Blunts. Different
No
guy,
way.
not the same guy.
Did you have to like look into that to make sure? Because I mean, I feel like if you were friends with a guy named Joey Blunts, like you may have lost contact with him over the years. And
I have.
It wouldn't surprise you that he ends up in Arizona somewhere.
Yeah, right. I was like, the guy said, he's like, Joey Blunt. I was like, oh, haven't heard that name since 2013. But yeah, it turned out it was not the same guy. I think this was a beatdown, man. I actually respect Arizona here quite a bit. I mean, it was totally a no-show for Chicago, but I think you got to give a lot of credit to Arizona, man. And like I said, sacked Caleb Williams 6 times. Kyler was actually sacked 3 times in this game. He had gone 3 straight games prior to this without taking the sack. 6.1 yards per play for Arizona, 3.4 for Chicago. 3.4. Very, very bad. I got nothing else here. Really rough week for DJ Moore on the way out.
Yes, DJ Moore, for someone that invested heavily in him, the returns are not awesome right now. And it's really been a minute since he's had the good games and he's had opportunities to do it. I mean, Arizona and Washington the last couple of weeks and not really anything to show for it. The kind of main event of the afternoon window didn't end up delivering exactly, but I mean, we continue to be so impressed by the Lions. I feel like they're 7-1 now. They're 4-1 on the road. A pretty emphatic 24-14 victory that they had. Jared Goff, I think you and I were both concerned about him in the conditions. You specifically definitely looked at the forecast ahead of time. It was like, it's going to be rainy and cold and crummy in Green Bay. And we haven't really seen Goff do well in those conditions. But Goff 2.0, Robo-Goff, he didn't mind at all.
Oh, yeah. We were pounding unders in this game. Hit a nice prop parlay in Detroit, Green Bay. This was another game where I had the under, too. I could not believe the number didn't come down more. I got it at 48.5 early in the week. Once my weather senses started kicking in, I was like, this is not going to be pretty. And it rained hard the entire game. Like normally you get these rain games and it's like, oh, it's raining. And then by like halftime, the rain dissipates. Like, no, it was just getting worse and worse. Like this was this full on rainstorm for the entire 4 quarters. So we ended up cruising to the under here. Oh, great about it until the Jordan Love pick 6. I'm like, all right, we're going to go into the half here 10-3. There is absolutely no way we're getting close to touching the over. And again, it ended up working out fine, but that called it into question. Jordan Love has a play like that every single week, it seems, man. And this was the worst of them all. I mean, Green Bay did not play well in the first half by any means. They were the team, ironically, that was, I thought, significantly more impacted by the weather. We saw balls bouncing off the hands of Tucker Kraft on a big 3rd down, balls bouncing off the hands of Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Dobbs, and it felt like the Lions were the more sure-handed team in this game. But the pick 6 was just such a killer. It's not like Green Bay needed to even score on that drive, but you go into the half 10-3, you're like, all right, we didn't play well. It's a 1-score game. We'll be okay. That was just such a brutal momentum swing. I mean, not only to throw a pick, but for it to be returned for a touchdown in a game where points are at such a premium. Green Bay also took a ton of penalties. They finished with 10 penalties on the day, but had 8 penalties midway through the second quarter. A lot of shots of a flustered Matt LaFleur on the sidelines. Lions ended up scoring early in the game on their first drive of the game. So Green Bay goes down. Pretty nice drive. They get a field goal, feel good about it. They get what seems like a stop in the red zone on 3rd down. Then the Lions line up to go for it on 4th down. And it's interesting because as somebody who watches as a fan, when I'm watching the Jags or you're watching the Ravens, like I always want my team to take the points. In those situations, I'm like, man, just take the points here. What are we doing? It's too risky. When it's the Lions and you're watching as like a Packers fan, you do not want them to go for this 4th down because it feels like the Lions have like a 95% chance of converting every single 4th down because they just have such a deep bag of tricks. And of course, there's Amon-Ra St. Brown just burning a cornerback in the corner of the end zone. Green Bay did not convert its first 3rd down in this game until late in the 3rd quarter. We saw some comical plays. Obviously, the Jordan Love pick 6. Christian Watson had a touchdown and just wildly misjudged the ball. It was a really nice throw through the rain by Jordan Love. And Watson slows down and jumps for it, and the ball sails like 5 yards over his head. It's like if he just keeps running in a straight line, that probably drops right in for, at the very least, a long gain, and again, probably a touchdown. But overall, this was I don't think this was a game where Green Bay comes out and thinks, oh my God, we can't beat this team. I mean, they outgained Detroit 411 to 261. The Packers still put up 6.6 yards per play in a rainstorm.
But the Lions just, they've got, I mean, what is this, 3 wins in a row at Lambeau now at this point?
Yeah.
All pretty convincing. I mean, yeah, the Lions, are they the best team in the NFL right now?
I think Kansas City has to retain that title, even though it doesn't feel like they should. But I think they're the best team in the NFC pretty easily.
I do too. They look, I was wondering if they were going to regress a little bit after last year, but they seem to just kind of be on an even bigger mission. It's pretty incredible to watch. And yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown's standing on his head touchdown. Very, a touching tribute to the Schism by Tool music video, where the guys just kind of awesome,
video.
Awesome stuff. Let's cap off the afternoon and then hit the Sunday nighter. Rams, Seahawks. One word: zany.
It was zany. It was wacky. There were all kinds of weird plays in this game. Kind of a tale of two halves, too. I mean, this was a pretty boring game in the first half. We had 9 straight non-scoring drives to open the game, including 8 punts, and then an interception sprinkled in there as well. Puka Nacua ejected in the second quarter for throwing a punch after an interception. Just kind of a weird play. Like, I get it. Like, they really bring the hammer down on any sort of punch, even if the opposing player is wearing a helmet, where it's like more dangerous for the guy throwing the punch. So that's like an auto ejection. Felt a little bit weak. Rams, it looked like they were just going to completely blow this game. Like right after that interception and the Puka ejection, they immediately give up a 50-yard pass down the field to Tyler Lockett. They had 2 long plays, did Seattle, on free plays, where you could see Rams defenders. It's like they see a guy jump off sides and then just quit on the play. It's like there's no whistle, man. And like twice, Seattle was able to get huge gains after that. Puka Nacua, by the way, just 1 catch for 11 yards before the ejection. So unfortunately, you basically took a 0 if you rolled him out there. But this game got crazy late. The Rams take back control. They intercept Geno twice. One of them was a 103-yard return by Cameron Kitchens. Another brutal interception by Geno deep in Rams territory a couple possessions later. So you think, all right, Rams, things are going their way. Much like the Saints, though, they could not run out the clock. They had multiple opportunities where it's just you get a couple first downs, get this thing closer to the 2-minute warning, force some timeouts. It's going to be really, really tough for Seattle to find a way to drive down. And the Rams went ultra conservative, totally turtled up, like weren't gaining any yards on any of these drives. You keep punting. They end up having a punt blocked. Thankfully, Geno threw a pick on that possession, so it didn't turn into anything. But then finally, the levee breaks on, at the very end of the game. They give up a 73-yard drive in basically a minute for Seattle to march down the field, hit JSN for 29 yards on a 4th down. Very next play, JSN touchdown. Massive, massive day for him overall. I feel like I'm finally vindicated on everybody to draft JSN. It was looking terrible for basically the entire first half of the season, but huge breakout game for him. 7 for 180 and 2 touchdowns, and a couple called back too. Could have been a bigger day for him. And then we get to overtime. Huge stop by the Rams. 4th and 1 at the Rams 16-yard line. Do you just take the field goal there if you're Seattle? I mean, obviously the Rams went down and scored, so maybe you say no, but they try to go for the touchdown. Kenneth Walker gets stuffed. Rams then go 24-yard pass, 16-yard pass. Kyron Williams run, 39-yard touchdown pass to Demarcus Robinson. Incredible catch, one-hander, walk-off win for the LA Rams.
Yeah, getting the ball first in overtime always presents like that weird challenge because, you can, it just feels like a half measure to take the field goal. So you're at home. I don't feel like the Rams defensive front is, they had bottled up Kenneth Walker to that point. He finished the day with 25 carries for just 83 yards. So, they had done well against him, but I think at home like that, you're kind of lucky to be in the game at this point. Like I understand the rationale of being aggressive and trying to close it out there or at the very least, you trust your defense to not blow it there on the other side, but you leave yourself open to any score being the one that ends the game. And obviously Demarcus Robinson goes ahead and punctuates that, his second touchdown of the day. So just a really fun game. I was big on the Rams going into this game, -1.5. I was happy to see it end the way it did, but boy, the fourth quarter when JSN was going bananas, I was very scared for that particular pick.
Yeah, neither team could really run the ball, by the way. It was not a great day for Kyron Williams, 22 for 69. Like you said, Walker, 25 for 83. So both defenses showed up. But Seattle, man, you can't live this way. You can't lose the turnover battle 3-1, especially with every Seattle turnover every week is just crushing, right? It's always like at the 5-yard line. They never have like a normal turnover. It's always just like, how the hell did that happen? And it's killing them week to week, man. They have 15 turnovers on the year. They have as many turnovers as the Panthers so far this season. They're -6 in terms of total turnover differential on the year. They outgained the Rams. They put up over 400 yards of offense. This is like the 3rd or 4th time this year where we've seen this kind of script play out, where they look like the better team offensively, but just commit the egregious errors. 12 penalties, by the way, for Seattle as well. So big win for the Rams. They're back. They're sitting at 4-4, Seattle now 4-5.
Yep, in Seattle 2-4 at home. So you run out of home games and you're not doing well with them. So they gotta get that figured out. Let's round it out. Sunday Night Football. Vikings 21, Colts 13. Kind of a nondescript one as far as Sunday nighters go. Not a ton of exciting plays. I mean, Justin Jefferson was Justin Jefferson, so that's always worth the price of admission there. But Indianapolis just couldn't really get a whole lot going. Only points in two of their quarters. Joe Flacco didn't look particularly good. Sam Darnold looked better, which I think was a big kind of storyline for this Vikings team, because after starting 6-0, I think people were starting to how fraudulent was that 6-0 start? Shades of 2022 creeping in a little bit, but they, not that this is a great Indianapolis team, but it's one that obviously made the decision to move off of Anthony Richardson, move to Joe Flacco with the intention of making a run towards the postseason. So you're not playing a dead team by any means. And this is an Indianapolis team that I think we saw time and time again last night. Like, it's a very feisty front seven, but Vikings able to just kind of push through at the end and get it done.
Yeah, this is a game that Minnesota clearly should have won by more than one score. And Indy has now played 9 straight one-score games to begin the year. They're 4-5 on the season. But, I mean, Minnesota dominated just about every aspect of this game, 29-13 in terms of first downs. They were 6 of 12 on third down. That's really good. They ran 22 more plays than the Colts did, 5.8 yards per play for Minnesota, almost 200 more total yards. They won time of possession 37-23. And that's about as big of a margin as you'll see. But it was the turnovers for Minnesota that kept the Colts in this game. I mean, Sam Darnold was not great. Made some big throws as he does every week. Only had 6 incompletions, but 2 of those were interceptions. Minnesota did not score a point in the first half of this game. They had the interception on the first play or first series of the game where they go all the way down and Sam Darnold throws an interception in the end zone intended for Hockenson. They punt. They then have a fumble returned for a touchdown and then miss 2 field goals in a row to go into the half. So this was a total calamity, worst case scenario first half for Minnesota. But I think good on this defense to hold the Colts to only 7 points, which came on that defensive touchdown. And then we saw Minnesota, come out, look a lot more confident, a lot more competent to begin the second half, 2 straight touchdown drives. But Sam Darnold still threw another pick. They pick off Joe Flacco late in the third quarter, and then first play for the Vikings, Darnold gives it right back, threw it into coverage, had Jordan Addison wide open on the right side of the field, just wide open. Darnold just kind of zeroed in on Justin Jefferson and said, I'm throwing it there no matter what. If he looks to his right just a little bit, he probably has a long touchdown. I thought the Indy pass protection actually held up pretty well in this game. You always think of the Brian Flores schemes and the blitzes and whatnot. Flacco was sacked 3 times, but they all came on the final desperation drive of the game when Minnesota was able to just tee off. Still, though, this was the lowest offensive output of the season for Indy. No offensive touchdowns, just 6 points. Not a whole lot here for fantasy. Josh Downs continues to come through. He looks really good every week. Michael Pittman, 1 catch for 14 yards. He's been rescued by Joe Flacco this season. That was not the case last night. He is the wide receiver 50 in total PPR points this season, 63rd in per game PPR production.
It's not going to get it done. For someone that was going like right around the 30th pick overall to be wide receiver 50.
Hated it.
Obviously, there's some things that are out of his hands, but, a game like last night, you can't just have, 1 catch. So I don't know. Indianapolis needs to get that figured out a little bit better. I think that there's reason to believe that with Joe Flacco back there, that it'll look more like a normal passing game moving forward. But, going up to Minnesota, a team that was not on the ropes necessarily, but again, looking to get rid of its 2-game losing streak, that was going to be a tough spot for Indianapolis regardless. Yeah. And, that kind of ended up coming to fruition.
Well, I mean, they also couldn't run the ball. Jonathan Taylor, 13 carries for 48 yards. Aaron Jones wasn't much better. I mean, this was kind of reminiscent of the Seattle Rams game. We just talked about 21 carries for 64 for Aaron Jones. So Cam Akers actually ran well, kind of came in for the save as the closer late in this game and ripped off some runs. But yeah, just a disjointed game. If you can't run the ball, that really, kind of puts you in a bad spot with Flacco. But a huge win for Minnesota, nonetheless, especially with the Packers losing. Packers are on bye next week, and they have a tough schedule coming out of the bye. Minnesota has a chance to really stretch this thing out and I think, kind of keep pace with Detroit in the division. Their next 3 games are all on the road, which is tough, but you get the Jags, the Titans, and the Bears.
That's about as good of a 3-game swing as you're going to have. If they're all going to be on the road, you might as well be a couple of AFC South ones, plus tack on the Bears. there at the end. So don't give up hope just yet, Vikings fans. Just because you lost 2 games in a row, think things are going to be just all right. But that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the NFL or Fantasy Football Podcast presented by RotoWire. And big thanks to our friends over at Circa and over at DraftKings Pick6. Jeff Erickson will be back next week. Is that correct?
That's what I'm told. He's out in Arizona watching baseball. Assuming he doesn't just stay out there forever, he should be back next week.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't blame him, and I wouldn't say no to coming back on, but expect Jeff to be back on the airwaves next week with Nick. For my co-host, Nick Whalen, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.